The Silent Rescue. The forest was Ethan Cross's sanctuary, a world of silence broken only by the snap of branches underfoot and the faint rustle of unseen creatures. For years, he had lived as a trapper in the northern wilds, a man of few words and fewer companions. To most, he was an enigma. To Amelia, his wife, he was a ghost who shared her home, but not her heart. The distance between them had grown so wide it felt like another wilderness, one far more perilous than the woods. That morning, the sky was gray with winter's breath, and Ethan moved through the snow in measured steps, scanning his traps. The routine anchored him, mechanical, predictable, safe. But near the ridge, he froze. A shape lay half buried in frost, fragile against the stark whiteness. At first glance, he thought a deer carcass, discarded by wolves. Then he noticed the soft rise and fall of breath, faint and irregular. It was a girl. Her hair, tangled with ice, fanned across the snow like spilled ink. Her lips were blue, her pulse a whisper of life. Ethan crouched, gloved hand hovering above her. Every instinct screamed caution. The wild was not kind, and the woods had taught him that mercy often bred ruin. Yet something about the fragility before him cut through his guarded silence. Against reason, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her slight weight. Back at his cabin, he stoked the fire until it roared, wrapping her in blankets. Hours passed before her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked at the wooden rafters, then at him, confusion softening into fragile trust. "You saved me," she murmured, her voice cracked with thirst. Ethan gave a curt nod, offering her water. Words never came easily to him, and with strangers, he preferred silence. Still, her eyes, deep, unguarded, luminous with gratitude, unsettled him. They searched his face as though he were more than a rescuer, as though she wanted to understand him. She introduced herself as Clara. No surname, no explanation, only that name spoken softly in the dim glow of the cabin. Ethan didn't press. Names carried weight, and in his world, weight meant danger. Yet even as he remained guarded, he felt a strange warmth stir, a dangerous warmth, one he hadn't felt in Amelia's presence for years. Over the next days, Clara recovered slowly. Ethan hunted, tended his traps, and returned to find her sitting near the fire, humming faint melodies that filled the cabin with an unfamiliar gentleness. She was talkative in contrast to his silence, asking questions he rarely answered, sharing fragments of her past that seemed both true and incomplete. Ethan noticed details he shouldn't. The curve of her smile when she laughed, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought he wasn't looking. He told himself it was nothing, just human observation. But the lie grew heavier each day. One evening, Clara asked quietly, "Why do you live out here, so far from everyone?" Ethan paused, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. "The forest doesn't betray," he said at last, his voice low and rough. Her gaze lingered on him, thoughtful and almost tender. "But it doesn't love, either." The words lodged in him like a blade. He turned away, unwilling to admit how close they cut. For years, Amelia had tried to bridge the silence between them, only to be met with walls he never tore down. And now, in the quiet presence of a stranger, those walls trembled. That night, long after Clara slept, Ethan stood by the fire, staring into the flames. His thoughts circled like wolves. The girl he had saved, the wife waiting for him in a lonely home, and the gnawing suspicion that trouble followed Clara like a shadow. She was no ordinary wanderer. Her wounds spoke of violence, her silence of secrets. Yet when dawn came, he found himself lingering near her bedside, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. He told himself it was only to ensure she lived. But deep inside, he knew it was something else, something he dare not name. The forest outside whispered warnings, its silence heavy with omen. Ethan's world, once unshakable in its solitude, had shifted. He had rescued more than a dying girl. He had invited danger, temptation, and conflict into his life. And though he could not yet see the full shape of it, One truth pressed upon him with growing certainty. Clara's presence would unravel everything he had worked so hard to keep bound in silence. Whispers by the fire. The days stretched into a rhythm neither Ethan nor Clara had expected. What began as a rescue became an uneasy companionship, bound by silence and unspoken questions. The forest outside remained harsh, but within the cabin, warmth flickered in the glow of the fire. Clara healed slowly, though her strength returned with each passing dawn. She was no longer the fragile figure Ethan had carried from the snow. Her laughter, soft but persistent, threaded through the air, unsettling the quiet life he had built. Ethan told himself it was temporary. When she could walk, she would leave. And yet, he found himself dreading that moment. Amelia's image haunted him in the stillness. Her patient eyes, her quiet devotion, her lonely meals eaten by candlelight in their small homestead miles away. He had grown used to distance, to walls erected between them. But Clara's presence forced him to confront the emptiness he had allowed to grow unchecked. One evening, while snow drifted in slow spirals outside, Clara sat close to the fire, tracing idle patterns on the wood floor. Ethan worked silently, mending a trap, but her voice broke through the crackle of burning logs. "You don't talk much," she said gently, tilting her head. Ethan grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes fixed on his work. "Does silence keep you safe?" she pressed, her tone more curious than accusing. His gaze lifted, meeting hers. For a moment, he considered ignoring the question, but something in her expression, a fragile sincerity, demanded truth. "Words can wound worse than blades," he replied, voice rough but steady. Clara's lips curved in a faint smile. "Maybe, but words can heal too." The statement lingered between them. Ethan felt its weight more than he wanted to admit. He had offered Amelia so few words over the years, starving her of what she had craved most, connection. Now here was Clara, a stranger, daring him to open the vault he had sworn shut. Later that night, after she had drifted into sleep, Ethan remained awake, staring at the firelight dancing across the cabin walls. His chest ached with a conflict he could not name. He had crossed no line, yet every glance, every conversation with Clara pulled him closer to something dangerous. The following day, as he returned from the forest with fresh game, he found Clara waiting by the window. She smiled at his arrival, relief softening her features. The sight stirred something deep, something he had not felt in years, the sense of being needed. Over supper, Clara's words slipped past his defenses again. "You're a good man, Ethan. You saved me when you didn't have to." He looked at her across the flickering candlelight. Her gratitude was genuine, but beneath it, he sensed loneliness. It mirrored his own. "I only did what anyone should," he muttered, though he knew it wasn't true. Most would have left her to the snow. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Clara's eyes lingered on him too long, her breath catching slightly before she looked away. The fire crackled louder, filling the space between them. That night, Ethan lay awake on his cot, listening to the faint rhythm of Clara's breathing. He told himself it was wrong to notice the softness of her voice, the warmth of her presence, the way her laughter made the cabin feel alive again. He thought of Amelia, waiting, and guilt pressed hard against his ribs. Yet when dawn came, guilt had not extinguished the quiet hunger gnawing inside him. He avoided Clara's gaze as he prepared for the day, but her smile followed him into the woods, into his thoughts, into the silence he once found comforting. By the week's end, Ethan realized he had stopped counting the days until Clara could leave. Instead, he caught himself wishing time would stretch longer, that the snow would never melt, that her footsteps would never carry her away. And though he said nothing, though his lips remained sealed and his hands busy with work, the truth carved itself into his heart. The walls he had built for years were crumbling, and Clara was the reason. He could feel it, though he would not admit it aloud. This was not rescue anymore. This was temptation, and temptation never came without cost. The line crossed. The storm arrived without warning, sweeping across the mountains with a ferocity that rattled the cabin walls. Snow hurled itself against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees like a chorus of ghosts. Ethan secured the door, his body tense, every motion sharp with unspoken urgency. Inside, Clara wrapped herself in a blanket, her pale face illuminated by the fire's glow. The world outside vanished into white, leaving only the two of them, trapped together in the flickering circle of warmth. Ethan tried to busy himself, sharpening his blade, mending torn furs, anything to avoid her gaze. But the storm forced stillness, and in that stillness, silence pressed too heavy. Clara's voice broke it, soft but insistent. "You keep your distance, Ethan. Even when you're near, it feels like you're far away." He lifted his eyes, meeting hers across the fire. Something unspoken surged between them, raw and dangerous. "Distance keeps things safe," he murmured. Her lips curved in a faint, trembling smile. Safe doesn't always mean alive. The word struck him harder than he expected. For years, safety had been his shield, his silence, his solitude, his refusal to let anyone breach the walls around his heart. But Clara's presence unraveled that shield thread by thread. The hours dragged on, the storm showing no mercy. Clara drew closer to the fire, shivering despite the heat. Ethan moved instinctively, draping an extra fur around her shoulders. His hand brushed against her arm, light, accidental, but enough to send a spark through them both. She looked up at him, eyes wide, lips parted. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with a pull neither of them could deny. Ethan tried to retreat, to step back into the safety of silence, but Clara caught his wrist, holding him in place. "You don't have to be alone tonight," she whispered. The sentence lingered in the air, heavy with invitation. Ethan's breath came unevenly. He thought of Amelia, her gentle patience, the vows he had never broken. His heart clenched with guilt, but his body trembled with longing. Clara's hand slid from his wrist to his palm, her fingers intertwining with his. It was such a small gesture, yet it shattered the boundary he had clung to. He could no longer pretend he was only her rescuer. He was a man starved of warmth, drawn to the flame before him, even knowing it could consume him. The storm outside raged louder, as if to drown the choice he was making. Ethan leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a hesitant, stolen kiss. For a heartbeat, he pulled back, fighting the urge, but Clara closed the distance with a soft, desperate insistence. The kiss deepened, and with it came the collapse of the walls he had built for so long. Every suppressed desire, every silenced word, every lonely night came pouring out in that single act. When at last they parted, breathless, Ethan's chest heaved with conflict. Guilt coiled inside him, but it was tangled with something else, an aching need that refused to be silenced. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears, but not of regret. "I don't care what the world says," she whispered. "I only know I feel alive with you." Ethan's throat tightened. He had never sought this, never planned for betrayal. Yet here it was undeniable, burning in the cabin's firelight. The night stretched on, and though he told himself he would stop, he didn't. One touch led to another, one whisper to another, until there was no longer a line to protect. They had crossed it, and nothing could undo what had been done. When dawn finally broke, muted and gray, the storm had passed. The world outside was still, blanketed in snow, but inside the cabin, the silence was heavier than ever. Ethan rose quietly, unable to meet Clara's eyes. The weight of betrayal settled upon his shoulders, pressing harder with every breath. He stepped outside into the snow, staring at the endless white. In the distance, the forest stood indifferent, its silence neither judging nor forgiving. But Ethan knew the truth. He had betrayed Amelia, and in doing so, he had opened a door that could never again be closed. Behind him, Clara stirred awake, her voice carrying softly through the cabin walls. "Ethan." He closed his eyes, torn between the call of duty and the pull of forbidden desire. His life was no longer simple, no longer safe. It had become a storm all its own, and he was caught in its center. And deep inside, a darker suspicion began to grow. Clara was not only temptation, she was carrying secrets. Secrets that, when revealed, would shatter far more than his marriage. The truth unveiled. The days following the storm unfolded in uneasy quiet. Clara moved through the cabin with softened steps, her gaze often lingering on Ethan with a tenderness he could not return. The night they had shared burned in his memory, a mixture of forbidden sweetness and corrosive guilt. He carried it like a weight beneath his ribs, unable to speak of it, unable to undo it. When he thought of Amelia, his chest tightened. She had waited for him faithfully, never demanding more than his presence, and yet he had betrayed her in the most irreversible way. The silence he had once used to shield himself now felt like a prison, every unspoken truth pressing harder against its walls. Clara sensed his unrest. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the snow in bands of gold and shadow, she placed her hand on his arm. "Ethan," she whispered, "you regret me." The words struck with precision. He did not deny them, but neither could he affirm them. Instead, he stepped away, staring out the window where the trees swayed under the dying light. "What happened should not have," he said at last, his voice low and rough. Clara's face paled, her eyes glistening. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, with a trembling breath, she spoke the secret she had carried. "My name is Clara Veron." The surname ignited Ethan's blood like a spark on dry tinder. He spun toward her, fury cutting through his restraint. "Veron!" His voice was a snarl, sharp and dangerous. Clara flinched, but she held her ground. "Yes, Marcus Veron is my father." The name echoed through the cabin like a curse. Marcus Veron, the man who had cheated Ethan years ago, stealing land and livelihood, the enemy who had driven him into exile. It was Marcus who had condemned Ethan to this life of silence, who had fractured his marriage with his greed and cruelty. And now, without knowing, Ethan had taken Marcus's daughter into his arms, into his bed. He staggered back, rage and betrayal warring within him. "You knew who I was?" he demanded. "No," Clara cried, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I swear I didn't. I never wanted to deceive you. I only knew you as the man who saved me. And her voice cracked, "I love you." Her confession struck harder than the storm outside ever had. Love. The word was poison and balm in equal measure. Ethan's heart rebelled, torn between the raw ache of her plea and the memory of Amelia's waiting silence. "You are my enemy's blood," Ethan said, his voice a ragged whisper. "And I have betrayed my wife because of you." Clara stepped closer, desperation etched into her face. "You didn't betray her because of me, Ethan. You betrayed her because you were already lost to her. I only gave you what you were starving for." The truth in her words wounded deeper than a blade. He could not deny the emptiness that had grown between him and Amelia, nor the way Clara had filled that void. But knowing it did not absolve the betrayal. The cabin walls seemed to close in, the fire sputtering low as if suffocated by the weight of revelation. Ethan's world had narrowed to two women, the wife he had neglected but vowed to honor, and the enemy's daughter who had reignited his heart but doomed him with her bloodline. The forest outside lay still, a deceptive calm after the storm. Ethan knew his choices were dwindling. To remain with Clara was to forsake Amelia entirely and align himself with the daughter of his sworn foe. To return to Amelia was to carry a secret that would corrode their bond forever. Clara reached for him once more, her hand trembling. "Ethan, whatever you decide, know that what we shared was real." It was not a lie. His eyes met hers, and for a moment he saw not Marcus Veron's daughter, but the fragile girl he had carried from the snow, the woman who had thawed his silence with warmth he had not believed he deserved. But the image of Amelia rose before him too, her patience, her love, her years of waiting for a man who had offered her so little. He could not escape the truth. Whatever path he chose, someone would be broken. As night settled over the cabin, Ethan stepped outside into the cold. The air bit at his skin, but it was clearer than the fire's smoke-filled air inside. The stars glittered above, indifferent witnesses to his torment. The world was silent, waiting for his choice. And Ethan Cross, silent trapper, betrayer, an unwilling lover, knew that the path ahead would demand a sacrifice he could never take back.